In 1936, in the city of Aomori, Japan, a prisoner named Yoshie Shiratori was locked up unjustly. They forced him to confess to a crime he didn't commit, and the public prosecutors were working to get him the death penalty. On top of that, he was beaten and tortured every night by the guards. He had had enough and decided to escape. Escaping from Aomori prison wasn't easy, but for someone like Shiratori who had nothing to lose, he went for it. One day at 6 a.m., he began to move. He knew that there was a 15-minute gap during the shift change of the guards. He had spent months studying their movements. The moment the opportunity came, he took out a metal wire he had hidden in a water bucket from the bathroom. He began trying to pick the lock. His hands were freezing from the cold, but after several minutes of trying, it worked. He unlocked the cell door, but that door was just the beginning. There were still many more doors to get through. He knew he had only a few minutes before the guards returned, so he didn't waste any time. Door after door, he opened them all and managed to get out of the prison building. But that was only half the journey to freedom, because even outside the prison building, he was still within the search perimeter, a large radius around the prison. If the alarm went off, they would catch him. At 5:45 a.m., the guards returned and checked his cell. What they saw shocked them. Shiratori was gone. They didn't realize that what was under the blanket was a piece of rotting wood, and the floor under his mattress had been dug. He had tricked them. They didn't discover the truth until the next day. Now those who know my videos and know me know that this can't be the end of the story. It's much bigger than that, and what comes next will blow your mind. So sit tight and listen to what happened. Shiratori was caught just 3 days later. He had been trying to steal supplies from a hospital. They returned him to his cell, and because he had tried to escape, this time they sentenced him to life in prison. That meant he would never see his wife and daughter again. All those months he spent planning the escape ended with just 3 days of freedom and a life sentence afterward. But Shiratori was known as the Houdini of Japanese prisons, and this was far from the end. 6 years later, in 1942, during World War II, they transferred him to Akita prison in Akita City. There, the guards treated him worse than in Aomori. They had heard of his escape attempt and wanted to make an example out of him, so no one else would dare think of doing the same. In addition to the usual beatings, they forced him to do hard labor, made him sleep on the freezing floor without a mattress, and put him in solitary confinement for very long periods. The solitary cell itself was specially designed, very small with an extremely high ceiling, and the walls were covered with thin sheets of copper, making them smooth and impossible to lean against for rest. No sunlight entered even during the day. The only light came from a tiny window in the ceiling. This room was specifically built for escape experts, to make sure they wouldn't break out. And as if that weren't enough, Shiratori's hands were always bound. Despite the constant pain and misery, one of the guards, the head guard, named Kobayashi, had some sympathy for him. He never beat him and would check on him from time to time. Maybe that kindness was what gave Shiratori the will to stay alive. Then came the night of June 15th. It was a stormy night. Shiratori was in solitary as usual. At midnight, a guard checked on him and couldn't believe his eyes. Shiratori had vanished into thin air. He was gone from the cell, with nothing left behind but the handcuffs. How did he escape? The guards had relied on several things to keep Shiratori from escaping, especially the handcuffs. But handcuffs were child's play for Shiratori. He knew many ways to unlock them. They said he used a wire, like he had in Aomori. Maybe he had managed to smuggle some silicone or sneak it in somehow. No one knew for sure. After unlocking the cuffs, he would press his hands and feet against the walls. They were close together, and climb. The guard said his ability to climb the smooth copper walls was no less than that of a lizard. The first time he reached the small ceiling window, it was shut and wouldn't open. But he noticed that the wooden frame around it was rotten. So every night, when he knew no one was watching, he would remove the cuffs, climb the wall, and try to loosen the frame. Then he'd climb down and put the cuffs back on. After a few months, he finally managed to open the window. But he didn't escape immediately. He waited for a stormy night like this so the rain would mask his footsteps. That was his plan, and he escaped again. Now see what happened next. 3 months after his escape, on September 18th, the head guard Kobayashi was at home when someone knocked on his door. When he opened it, he was shocked. Shiratori was there in terrible shape, clearly needing help. Kobayashi let him in, gave him food, let him rest, and listened to his story. Shiratori told him, "I didn't mind being in prison, but I escaped twice because of the torture. The guards never showed me mercy. I'm an innocent man. Your kindness gave me the courage to come here and tell you what I plan to do. I want to turn myself in to the authorities and seek justice. I want to sue the guards and expose the corruption in the Japanese prison system. I'll launch a campaign to bring change, to stop the injustice, and to finally gain my freedom. It's the only way I can return to my wife and daughter. I don't want to live as a fugitive anymore." A great plan. He was turning himself in, and the fact that the head guard, the only one who treated him well, could support his story made it more believable. Shiratori felt he was doing the right thing, so he came to Kobayashi and shared his plan. But after a while, when Shiratori went to the bathroom, Kobayashi called the police. Shiratori's trust in him was misplaced, and the plan failed. They returned him to prison. It was a huge disappointment. And as we say, no one learns except from their own mistakes. After that, he never trusted any prison guard again. But for his second escape, the court added 3 more years to his life sentence. Shiratori requested to be transferred to Tokyo prison. At least the weather there was warmer, and he couldn't bear the cold of the northern prisons anymore. His previous escape attempts had left him physically weakened, but they denied his request. Let's say the judge was cruel, because not only did he reject the request, but he transferred him to Abashiri prison in Hokkaido, the farthest north prison in Japan. No one had ever escaped from there, because escaping meant walking into a deadly winter hell. It was 1943. The cold was unbearable. In Abashiri prison, the cell temperature was below freezing. The inmates' food would freeze before they could eat it. And despite all this, they threw Shiratori into his cell wearing only summer clothes. He sat there almost paralyzed by the cold. At one point, in a moment of despair, he tried to stand up and confront the guards, furious at them. They beat him and knocked him to the ground. He stood again, still angry, and told them, "I promise you, I will escape again. And believe me, you won't be able to stop me. No one will. You think these handcuffs will stop me? They're useless. I know a million ways to break free. Even if I can't unlock them, I'll just break them." And he broke the chain right in front of them. The guards were terrified and backed off. It was clear he had other skills besides climbing. It was an incredible moment, but also a foolish one. By revealing his capabilities, the guards were now fully aware of what he could do. They started preparing a cell that was impossible to escape from. The new cell was made entirely of steel, so it wouldn't rust and weaken. All the openings were smaller than his body. He couldn't fit through any of them. He was cuffed behind his back, and his legs were shackled so he couldn't move. The cuffs were of a different kind, with no keyholes. They weighed 20 kilograms. The only way to remove them was to call in 2 specialists every few weeks, and the process took 2 hours. They would only remove them when he needed to bathe, which they allowed only every few weeks. And even though it was already freezing, the real winter hadn't started yet. With the coming cold and the horrific conditions, they were sure he wouldn't survive. To make sure he got even weaker, they gave him only half a portion of food. He had no energy left to do anything. They humiliated him. Every time they gave him food, they placed it near the door. Because the openings were so small, he had to crawl like a dog to eat. The cuffs on his hands and feet made it nearly impossible to move. Even sleep was a form of torture. Life in Abashiri was literal hell. But by God's mercy, Spring came. At least he regained a bit of strength. But in his condition, what could he possibly do? Months passed with no change, until one night, a guard working in the office heard a sound from the ceiling. He went to check on the prisoners. When he reached Shiratori's cell, he was shocked. The bed was neatly folded, the clothes were there, and the cuffs that required specialists were unlocked and placed beside the mattress. Shiratori was gone. They immediately sounded the alarms, but despite all their efforts, he had vanished from the prison. So how did he manage to escape Abashiri, with all the conditions he lived under? The preparation for this escape began 6 months earlier, when he had no energy and was constantly shackled. The only thing he had was time and patience. Every day the guards gave him food, though little of it, and he would leave a bit aside. Then, pretending to look up, he would splash some of the soup onto the window frame and the handcuffs. His plan was that the salt in the food would cause the metal to oxidize and rust, weakening it so it would be easier to remove. After a month, the metal rusted and weakened. By the end of spring, he was able to remove the handcuffs and the steel window frame. Though the guards had made the openings small, they didn't know that Shiratori had abnormal flexibility. You've probably seen videos of such people online, those who seem to have no bones. Shiratori just needed to fit his head through the opening. The rest was easy. His bones moved however he wanted. And that's how he became the first person to escape from Abashiri prison. It was a huge effort and a successful plan. But don't forget, this prison was in the far north. As we said, the hellish cold there was unforgiving. The guards joked, "He's a madman. If the cold doesn't kill him, a mountain bear will." After news spread of his escape again, the only one who had hope and wished he'd survive was his wife. She was worried and saddened because she knew that even if he survived the cold, he couldn't come back to them, because the police would always be after him. She secretly wished Japan would lose the war. If Japan lost, America would take over the country and the system would collapse. No one would care about her husband anymore. A year later, in August 1945, her wish came true. America took over the country, and the prison and legal systems changed. Some charges were dropped, and searching for Shiratori was no longer a priority. But the question remained. Where was he? Was he still alive? The answer, yes. He was alive, in complete isolation. This time, he had imprisoned himself. He found an abandoned mine on the slopes of a mountain in Hokkaido and managed to survive there. For food, he ate fruits and whatever grew on trees, and he hunted wild rabbits and raccoons. He managed his life, but life went on. But the loneliness, the cold, and the years of hiding began to take a toll on him mentally. Years passed as he lived like a ghost. No human contact, no voices, no warmth. Each day, he would wake up in his abandoned mine shelter, searching for food or fixing whatever he could. But deep down, he knew this wasn't life. He felt that no matter how far he ran, true justice had yet to be served. Then one day, in 1948, nearly 3 years after his last escape, something in him changed. He climbed down from the mountains and walked to the nearest police station. And there, with no one chasing him, no trap set, he turned himself in. The police were stunned, not just because he had escaped from the most secure prison in Japan, but because he came back on his own. No one had caught him. No one even knew where he was, yet he returned. But the real shock came during the trial. A new lawyer volunteered to defend him and presented undeniable evidence of the torture and inhumane treatment he had suffered. Even the former head guard, Kobayashi, testified in his favor, saying Shiratori was always respectful and that he had personally witnessed the abuse he endured. The court listened, and for the first time, they saw not a criminal, but a man who had been broken, punished, and wronged by a corrupt system. They realized his escapes weren't acts of defiance, but cries for justice. In 1961, after spending more than 20 years between prison walls and isolation, Yoshie Shiratori was officially released. And the strangest part? He never sought revenge. He never wrote a book. He never gave interviews. He lived the rest of his life quietly and passed away in 1979 at the age of 72. Today, his name is etched into Japanese history as the legendary prison escape artist. But the truth? His story was never about escape. It was about survival and the unbreakable will of a man who refused to accept injustice. The world is full of mysteries. Some are waiting to be discovered, and others are better left untouched. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more strange and thrilling tales. Until next time, stay curious, stay mysterious, and see you next time.